If you're looking for a brighter experience from an OLED monitor, this year we should see a decent improvement in both SDR and HDR brightness performance with the arrival of next-gen OLED panels. We'll run through today the spec improvements being released, the technology and the new panels which make this all possible, and look at the monitors which have been announced so far using them so that you can understand what these improvements are and consider whether you want to wait for a new monitor later this year. OLED monitor brightness is one of those areas that gets criticised by users who are perhaps used to a brighter LCD monitor in the past, or they're perhaps comparing the monitor against mini LED alternatives or maybe other modern OLED TVs. Maybe you just want something that can reach a higher luminance for desktop use in well-lit rooms, or you're looking for a brighter, more impactful HDR experience. For SDR usage, the typical spec offered so far has been 250 nits, with a few newer models offering 275 nits max. The typical real-world performance from our testing is that these screens reach around 270 to 280 nits maximum when you're using those screens in a uniform brightness mode. Most are rated to 250 to 275 nits in the monitor specs though, so that's going to be the easiest figure to compare and talk about here when we look at future monitors. That 250 nits is perfectly adequate for most people and for SDR content, although if you're finding your OLED screen looks darker than expected in desktop usage, you may want to make sure that you're not making this one very common setting mistake, which is explained in our video here. The latest generation OLED monitors promise an increase in SDR brightness for this year. From Samsung Display's QD-OLED panels, they will offer an increase from 250 nits to 300 nits typical brightness, while LG Display's WOLED panels will offer an increase up to 335 nits. That's a 20% increase in the luminance spec for QD-OLED monitors and a perceived brightness improvement of 8%. For WOLED panels, there's an increase of 22 to 34% in luminance specs or an 8 to 13% perceived brightness improvement. We'll talk about the new technologies and panel developments that make this all possible in a moment, but before we do, let's have a look at the HDR improvements too. For HDR, QD-OLED monitor panels will remain at the same 1000 nits peak brightness spec as before, but we will see some improvements in other areas which do have more of an impact on real-world performance anyway, than just pushing that headline peak brightness spec for small highlights and dark scenes. Having said that, with increases from LG Display for their WOLED panels that we'll talk about in a moment, those can reach a lot higher than the 1000 nits spec. We'd expect to see Samsung Display maybe offer improvements to QD-OLED panels in this area at some point too. For QD-OLED, their 10% APL spec for the new panels will move up from 400 nits to 500 nits with these future panels, while the full screen 100% APL luminance will increase from 250 to 300 nits. This allows these new panels to be certified under VESA's Display HDR 500 True Black tier, a step up in requirements from the True Black 400 tier that's been used on all QD-OLED monitors to date. Look out for OLED monitors certified under HDR 500 True Black to indicate which models have an improved brightness. For WOLED panels, the next-gen panels will offer a reasonable 15% increase in peak luminance from the current 1300 nits spec to 1500 nits, as well as improvements to other APLs that will impact real-world brightness. LG Display don't provide specs for 10% APL, but we've seen recent previous-gen WOLED panels reach up to 700 to 800 nits for white luminance in those areas. That's already from our testing of current monitors. We'd expect improvements with the new panels, but we'll have to wait for them to be released and tested to confirm by how much. We do know that the full screen 100% APL luminance will increase from a spec of 275 nits max today to at least 335 nits with the new panels, again allowing for those new monitors to be certified under the VESA Display HDR 500 True Black tier. We've looked at the expected brightness increases then for SDR and HDR usage, but what about the panels and technologies that make this possible? For QD-OLED panels, there's only actually one new panel being produced so far that offers a higher brightness spec and HDR 500 certification, and that's the 27-inch 1440p 500Hz QD-OLED panel that's being produced this year. That's being adopted by a wide range of display manufacturers, including MSI, Asus, Gigabyte, and others. While this is officially actually still a third-gen QD-OLED panel, not yet using their latest EL 3.0 OLED material, Samsung Display have enhanced the efficiency of the 27-inch Gen 3 panel for this update, allowing for that improved brightness. So in the case of the 27-inch QD-OLED panel, this 500Hz version offers improved brightness along with that increased refresh rate. Most of these new 500Hz QD-OLED monitors are due to be released in late July or August. We've not had a chance to test any of these in detail ourselves yet, but in the meantime you might want to check out the review of the MSI MAG271QP X50 over at Monitors Unboxed, where the brightness improvements were measured and compared. Samsung Display's latest 2025 Gen 4 technology uses an updated EL 3.0 material, which will in the future offer improved brightness in many cases. Although that's not actually applicable for their new 27-inch 4K resolution Gen 4 panel that's been released this year already. That remains with the previous brightness and HDR 400 specs. For the future, Samsung Display have already announced a 27-inch panel with an even higher 5K resolution and an expected 120Hz refresh rate, which will offer the enhanced brightness when it's produced. There's also a future 34-inch ultra-wide panel with a 3440 by 1440 resolution and 360Hz refresh rate, which will be part of their 4th gen technology and will offer HDR 500 certification as well. We wouldn't expect any monitors to be released using those new 34-inch and 27-inch 5K panels until 2026 at best. There's no firm timescales at this time provided on production of either of those underlying panels. No other future QD-OLED panels have been announced so far or showcased yet, but we would expect any others in the future to offer the enhanced brightness as well as their Gen 4 technologies. On the other side, we have LG Display's WOLED panel technology, and the improvements in brightness will come from their new 4th gen so-called primary RGB tandem panels. Those will be released first later this year. This technology shifts from a 3-layer panel structure to 4 layers, giving rise to the technical branding of primary RGB tandem. This is referring to the actual light emitting layers though of the OLED panel, not to be confused with the subpixel layout of the panels, which for now remains the same RGWB as their other recent WOLED panels. Anyway, by moving to a 4-layer panel structure, this is what helps improve the brightness of the WOLED panels as well as improve the colour performance too, through better separation of the coloured layers. So far, LG Display have announced 2 panels featuring this 4th gen primary RGB tandem technology, also sometimes referred to as Meta 3.0 confusingly, but other future panels should all be based on this technology as well. The first panel that is actually now in mass production is a 27-inch panel with a 1440p resolution and a 280Hz refresh rate. We've already seen Gigabyte announce a monitor featuring this with their MO27Q28G. That was showcased at Computex in May this year, and it's due to be released in July or August. The other panel LG Display have formally announced now is a 27-inch 1440p 540Hz panel, which will be one of their flagship offerings and the fastest OLED panel available to date. It will even offer a dual mode function allowing you to boost the refresh rate further up to a whopping 720Hz. But only at a much lower 1280 by 720 resolution for some very specific gaming situations. LG Display have recently confirmed that they've successfully developed and tested this panel and that mass production will commence later in the year. We had some inside information from ASUS at Computex this year, who told us that they would be developing a monitor using this panel, also combined with their new true black glossy screen coating. Further info and specs are still to be confirmed at this stage. Maybe we'll see some info at Gamescom in August. If not, I'd expect to see it at CES in January. Chinese monitor manufacturer SDC also teased their own version of this screen with the same panel but with a standard matte anti-glare coating. Whether or not their model will be available more widely outside of China and Japan remains to be seen though. We'd expect other monitor manufacturers like Gigabyte perhaps to adopt this new panel too, but no official word on that at this stage. So there's quite a few new OLED monitor panels planned that will offer this improved brightness performance both from QD-OLED and WOLED technology. Now that the panel manufacturers have tackled pixel density, resolution and refresh rates, while at the same time also enhancing longevity and burn-in care, we'd expect brightness improvements to continue to be a focus in the future. Obviously, these new monitor panels don't reach as bright as TV panels, which this year are reaching up to 4000 nits peak brightness, but it's a very different segment with different use cases, viewing positions, and content consumption patterns. So we can't expect them to match TV panel brightness. Let us know in the comments section below which monitor or panel you're most excited for, and make sure you hit subscribe to stay up to date for all our other future content coming up. Thank you for watching. We'll catch you next time.